We are very pleased to present the webinar titled Teaching ITAs to Communicate Complex Science to General Audiences. Our speaker is Heather Boldt. Heather is the director of Emory's English Language Support Program, Laney Graduate School, and has over 20 years experience teaching graduate level oral communication and writing. She serves as the speaking coach for Emory's annual 3MT competition and is an executive board member of the Consortium on Graduate Communication. We are very honored to have her speak to us today. My name is Eva Misogled, and I will be your moderator for today's event, along with my colleague, Mike O'Neill. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Heather Boldt.
Okay, thank you so much, Eva and Mike. I wanted to start off with my acknowledgements for this invitation. I'm very excited to speak to the group today. As Eva said, I'm the director of our English Language Support Program in the Laney Graduate School. And that role involves supporting our multilingual students with their graduate writing and their graduate oral communication tasks. So although I'm not specifically an ITA coordinator or trainer, it is a part of my job. And we will have plenty of time at the end in the question session to talk about and to brainstorm more from those of you who do work, directly, exclusively with ITAs about how this could or could not work in that context. As many of you may know, what that 3MT coach part means is that I serve as a public speaking coach for our participants in the 3-minute thesis competition, which is a competition with students from all divisions like humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, talking to a general audience about their dissertation work, and they have to do it in 3 minutes or less. It's held at 600 or so, maybe more, universities around the world. So as you'll see as we go through today's materials, it is a great resource for hearing students talk very clearly about their research. Okay, so in terms of kind of framing the discussion, I wanted to start with, how does a good teacher explain concepts? What do teaching assistant handbooks say on this topic? Or what do more experienced international teaching assistants say to less experienced ones about explaining concepts? And what you'll get is 4 examples here. The first 2 are from teaching assistant handbooks, and the second 2 are from an internal document that we have compiled for our international teaching assistants that includes tips and strategies from experienced teaching assistants that are in their 5th or 6th year at Emory and have, by that point taught, served as a TA for a couple of sections. So this is the part where we're going to try to be interactive as much as possible. So if someone would raise their hand, I can call on you, and then you can unmute, and you can read these first 2 examples, which are from teaching assistant handbooks. Okay, I see Kenneth has raised a hand, so yes, please.
So it says, a good teacher makes difficult topics easy to understand, uses examples, details, analogies, metaphors, and variety in modes of explanation to make material not only understandable, but memorable. And this is from the Rensselaer TA Handbook 2016.
Beautiful. Would you read the next one as well, Kenneth?
Sure. Good teachers use examples from everyday life. When lecturing or leading discussions, try to make your arguments as concrete as possible by using examples from everyday life. And this is from the UFLA TA handbook, Jordi et al.
Great. Yeah. So that's the University of Florida,
Florida.
I believe. Yes. Okay.
Mhm.
Super. So these next two quotes are from those experienced international teaching assistants. And it's, advice they're giving to TAs who are in that role for the first time. Would somebody else be brave? Okay. I don't want to missay your name. Was it
I go by Costa. Don't worry about it. It's a hard name. So
Okay, perfect. Go for it.
even if not required, attend as many similar classes or watch recorded lectures in your department as possible. I did this and paid close attention to how the professors guided students toward understanding with illustrations and examples.
Okay, and that CSI is computer science and informatics. So it's a TA. And would you read this next one as well?
Sure. Speaking in front of others to explain complicated concepts is not easy and requires practice. Be very prepared. Get familiar with the materials to be presented and how to make it easier for students to understand. Emory Chemistry ITA.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much. So I think the key takeaway from these quotes, it's nothing new to any of you, is that, ITAs need to develop this skill of explaining complicated concepts, scientific complex concepts in a clear and engaging way. So the question becomes, how do we how do we help them gain those skills? And for time purposes, I'm just going to read these first few. So if you look in TA handbooks, or if you look just best practices for teachers, you'll find some variation of these four kind of pillars of communication. So use familiar language first, then introduce complex ideas, provide examples and comparisons to everyday life. So that's echoing what we just saw on the previous slide. Check for understanding by asking students to summarize key points. I know that many of you have materials related to that, like lexical phrases that they can use to check for comprehension and ask students to summarize. And then, use visual aids like slides, diagrams, and live demonstrations. So what I'm going to do today is kind of break these down into kind of three more bite-sized strategies that I think can be taught and practiced when you're working with ITAs. So I believe that many of you are familiar with a series from Wired that's called, Scientists Explain Something. In this case, it's nuclear fusion in 5 levels of difficulty. I'm going to be showing a lot of clips today, and don't worry about trying to write anything down. You will receive the PowerPoint, and it's got all of the references, including the links to these different videos and these different science communication series that are available online. So this one, I just wanted to show you a bit of it so you can see the format of it. You can see here that the 5 levels are explaining nuclear fusion to a child, to a teen, to a college student, to a grad student, and to an expert. And for our purposes, of course, we're going to focus on the college student explanations if we're picturing teaching to the undergrads. I'm going to play just a minute, not a minute, a few seconds of the beginning, and then we will move ahead to the college student explanation. And as we watch, you can think about what elements of these 4 strategies you see the professor using.
My name is Ann White. I'm a professor of nuclear science and engineering at MIT, and I've been challenged today to explain nuclear fusion in 5 levels of increasing difficulty. Fusion is so exciting because it is extraordinarily beautiful physics, which underpins some of the most basic.
Okay, so each video starts that way with the professor introducing themselves and then talking about what the topic is that they're going to explain in the 5 different levels. And I want to get, okay, now let's look at the college students. So after we watch a little bit of this, I'm going to ask you to write in the chat what you noticed in terms of these strategies for, clear science communication.
Clean electricity. So what have you heard about fusion already before today?
The impeding joke is that, we've looked forward to fusion for a long time, but you've not exactly gotten there yet. But if we do ever get there, it would solve a lot of our energy problems in a dramatic way.
Do you have any idea about any of the challenges? Like, why has it taken us so long to get to fusion?
Making a star on Earth is not easy.
So we are trying to bring a star to Earth. We are not going to be using hydrogen the way our star in our solar system, our sun, uses hydrogen to make helium and generates fusion energy that way. Instead, on Earth, we're going to be using isotopes of hydrogen, deuterium and tritium. What do you know about charged particles? If I want to try and push 2 positively charged particles together, 2 protons together, what do you think is going to happen?
They repulse each other and they don't like being close together, so they push back on that force.
What we're going to call the pushback is a Coulomb interaction or Coulomb collision. So you can sort of imagine if I were to take a deuteron.
Okay, so what did we notice? I think I'm going to rely on Afa to see what's in the chat.
So we can see she compared the process to the sun.
Yes, okay, so she used some familiar example, the sun. That's great.
Started with his prior knowledge. Asked the student to summarize regularly every few sentences, assess students' knowledge, frequent check-ins.
Okay, great. One thing that you may have also noticed, maybe it's in the chat, is that she said, 2 positively charged particles or protons, So using more everyday language before adding in the technical term that the student probably needs to become familiar with. Is there anything else in the chat, Ava, that we want to read aloud before we move to the next?
Providing new vocabulary and asking what the challenges were.
Okay, great. And gestures, like this kind of goes in with the live demonstrations or visual aids. She said, they bounce off of each other. So you see her using gesture to aid communication. Okay, so this leads us very nicely to our next, I think I said this already. For today's purposes, I'm going to focus on the top 2 of these strategies that are more language-based, and I think can be more easily taught in like a classroom setting or in a one-on-one setting with an ITA, whereas the checking for understanding and the visual slides, I think that would happen more like in a micro-teaching session. So I'm going to focus on those 2, and I'm going to break it down into 3 strategies. And the first one is the most straightforward. It's the familiar first, just like, 2 positively charged particles, otherwise known as protons. So it's pretty straightforward one. I like to start with this with students, whether I'm coaching them with a 3MT or helping them do like an elevator talk, or any other type of context where they're going to try to explain their science to a non-expert. So let's just look at a few more examples. This first one is from the Royal Society. If you're not familiar with them, they are a well-regarded organization of scientists, engineers, and technologists. And their YouTube channel is a great resource. It's got featured narrations, videos like this one. It's got interviews with scientists. It's got recorded lectures. The clip that we're going to look at is called The Science of, actually for time purposes, I won't play this one, but it's called The Science of Snowflakes. And it's narrated by a physics professor, as you can see here, Professor Brian Cox. And it's got some nice examples of this familiar first strategy. Would somebody, we're going to do the read aloud thing again. Would somebody raise their hand and read aloud? Kenneth, great.
Each molecule of water, or H2O, is made up of something. The snowflake, or to use its more technical term, the snow crystal.
Okay, beautiful. I'm going to ask you to do the next one, which,
Okay.
oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. This one is from another series that I'll talk about in just a second, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that. But Kevin, would you just read those the examples first?
Sure. When you get trapped on an island, if you are a small-bodied mammal like a small rodent, you tend to get larger. If you are a larger-bodied mammal, you tend to get smaller, which is called island dwarfism. In our species, Homo sapiens, our face is tucked up more under the brain case, and that creates a bend. We have flexion there, and this flexion, blah, blah, blah.
Great, thank you. That was super delivery of that, and we could really hear how the speaker first gave the familiar word bend and then emphasized this is flexion, right? So this is a series from Wired that they still seem to be updating quite a bit. There's not as many of those 5 levels of difficulty videos anymore, but this series is called like paleontologist, or whatever the name of the scientist is, answers questions from social media. So it's really fun because you get to see how they respond to these questions, kind of, at least it seems like on the spot. Maybe they have rehearsed. So I'm just going to show you a piece or two of this so you can get the feel if this might be something you could work with your students.
I'm paleoanthropologist Steve Churchill. Let's answer some questions from the internet. This is Caveman Support. At Sean Spain asks, how did cavemen hunt with clubs? Animals are really fast. We often think of cavemen as having clubs.
Okay, so you see he's reading from this, from his laptop, and he's answering these questions, and it's targeted to a general audience. And I'm looking at my notes to see if I wrote down the next time marker of the flexion. I think it's great because it's also showing, you know, the kind of like the live demonstration idea. I think it's coming. If I can't find it, we'll move on, but I think it's maybe right here.
At Blues Liquor asks, what is the missing link between ape and man? Well, as a paleoanthropologist.
Okay, I'm gonna skip it. But he actually holds up the skull and he shows the bend in the skull, and then he says, so we have flexion here and this flexion. So it's really clear, a clear way to introduce that new term. And this last one, I'm going to move on because this is super straightforward, I think, this strategy. But here we have another example. This is a 3-minute thesis. I will show an example 3MT in just a moment. But in this one, the student said, problems with the placenta can lead to the baby or fetus not growing well as it should, and being too small at birth. This is called fetal growth restriction. So very simple, just put the familiar language before you put the technical language. Sometimes it's not obvious to students what a big difference that could make. Okay, so the next strategy is provide examples related to everyday life. And for me, in my work with students, it's like they know this, but they're not necessarily paying attention to it around, like when they're listening to lectures or when they're trying to describe their science. Like they know it's a strategy, but they don't really know how to operationalize it. So by giving them, now this is kind of meta, giving them examples of specific examples that they can give in the classroom raises their awareness of it and gives them a concrete way to notice and to start perhaps doing it in their own communication. This is where I'm going to ask for another volunteer to read one or two of these. Do we have anybody?
I'll do it, Heather.
Oh, super. Who is that?
This is Jen Brondell.
Oh, hi, Jen. Okay, yes.
Hi. So think of a dog hitting a rug in a hallway and it gets totally crumpled up. That's exactly what's happening to Asia as India runs into it. And that crumple zone is the Himalayan mountains.
Okay, great. How about the next one?
I created a range of tiny little particles, which are so small that you could fit 1 million of them inside just a few grains of sand. These particles are called nanoparticles.
Okay, so I love both of these examples, which are from 3-minute thesis competitions. They've really stuck with me. Like whenever I like to watch like nature documentaries, and whenever they talk about plate tectonics, I think, oh, it's a crumple zone, because I can picture this crumpled up rug. And of course, I think that in the second example, I think the next information would be the technical information, like the size of the particles in nanometers, but this is a good way by using sand and you know, hair, you see all these examples. And again, students start to think, oh, I could do that. I could come up with this type of example to help illustrate what I'm communicating. So now I'm going to show a 3MT, and this was our first winner at Emory of the 3-minute thesis competition, the first year that we held it in 2012. And she's now an associate professor in public health here at Emory. So I have a warm place in my heart for this particular video and this particular winner. But this is going to show how, as you've already noticed, I'm sure, these strategies really overlap. It's kind of hard to put them into buckets. I've put them into these 3 buckets just because I think it's a way to present it to students. But of course, they all, you know, there's many different ways you could frame this as you present it. So let's just take a minute. And this is also going to lead us to our third strategy. So let's do this again, where we listen and we notice what kind of strategies she's using. Now I'm putting on my teacher hat here. Okay, so that's your task, is listen for clear science communication strategies.
This program is brought to you.
Oh, and I meant to say, as you probably know, the volume on these different clips is not necessarily consistent. So you may need to raise or lower the volume on your end. I think this one might be a little low, but I hope you'll be able to hear it.
You by Emory University.
Our next competitor is Lisa Stames. Lisa is a fifth-year doctoral candidate in Emory's Nutrition and Health Sciences program.
Did you know that 1 out of every 3 people sitting in your row is at high risk for developing type 2 diabetes? This disease, which I'll refer to simply as diabetes, has serious consequences. Heart disease, blindness, even amputations. The focus of my research is to detect early signs of the disease, and in doing so, identifying new ways to prevent the disease from ever occurring. Normally, the food that we eat is broken down into small molecules of sugar called glucose, traveling from the bloodstream to all of the body's cells. The hormone insulin acts like a key, unlocking the doors on the body's cells for glucose to enter. During diabetes,
Okay, I'm going to try to look at the chat and see. So what examples did you notice? Jump to the latest. Okay. Glucose is the key. Yes. Oh, yes. For the 3MT type talk, you definitely have that hook where she's connecting to the audience, like 1 of 3 in your row. I will refer to this as diabetes. Yes. So there's a lot of examples. When you share these with students, you can, simplifying the term, yeah, type 2 diabetes, which I will shorten to diabetes. Yeah, so what was I saying? There are a lot of these strategies throughout 3MTs that you can have students pay attention to, identify, just like what we just did. I think you can give them lexical phrases, like, you know, the technical term is, and I've got some of those later in the presentation. Maybe that's a whole new category of lexical phrases that we share with them, like in addition to checking for comprehension and, you know, we could, asking students to summarize, we could add a new category. And simile and metaphor is the big category. Let me just see what's in the chat before I go on. Oh, yeah, in terms of kind of communication strategies, yeah, like you should care about this because you may get diabetes. Yeah, but in terms of language, she used this beautiful metaphor, no, actually simile, like a key unlocking the doors of the body's cells. And again, this has really stuck with me because I now picture, you know, like, oh, the body needs the insulin in order to for the glucose to get into the cell, right? And somehow it made diabetes make more sense to me. Okay, so let's move on to the third strategy, which I've just given you a preview of, use comparisons, including simile and metaphor. So I believe everybody is familiar with TED and their science talks. So this is a TED talk, and I'm going to show a clip of it because it's really nice, because even though he's sitting and this is maybe semi-prepared speech, it feels like a professor lecturing to a group of students. It doesn't feel like this very rehearsed public speaking event that is the 3MT. So I like to use a mix of these types of sources. I also like to use various like world Englishes, various levels of proficiency in English, if it's a speaker of English as an additional language, so that students can see like different aspirational models. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a second and just read this so you have a feel for the simile that he's going to use, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, so I'm going to play it. I have to find where my clip is. So he's reacting to the news. So this is a TED Talk, you can see. He's reacting to the news that they're trying to recreate a woolly mammoth from a genome, from its DNA. I don't want to mess up the science, but he knows that students are very well versed with, computer storage and kilobytes and megabytes and gigabytes. So he makes this nice comparison. So here it comes.
And so that's really the beginning of my talk here. Just a couple of weeks ago, a company made the news raising money with the goal of wanting to de-extinct woolly mammoths. Now, setting aside whether you think this is a good idea or not, let's just discuss, what it actually means to take, let's say, a mammoth genome and try and create a living, breathing mammoth from that information. And this will lead us down the path to really understanding in greater depth what biological information means and what metaphors we can use to understand it. So first of all, I think biological information these days is common currency. In the digital era, all of you are digital natives. We can actually translate between biological and digital information very easily. So the SARS-CoV-2 RNA genome, for example, it's about 30,000 bases. It's about 10 KB of data. The E. coli genome is about 4 million bases. It's about 1 MB of data. And the woolly mammoth genome, which is roughly the same size as our genome, it's 4 billion bases. And it's roughly a GB of data. And if you like to think of it differently, SARS-CoV-2 is like a small image. E. coli is like a music album. And woolly mammoth is like a proper HD movie on a DVD. So,
okay, so I think a really nice example of connecting to the familiar, using comparisons. This next example is from Science Friday. This is an audio podcast. So it's a podcast, so it's audio only. But what's really nice about it for instructional purposes is that each episode, which is on Fridays, is broken down on their website into little chunks, and it's got a transcript. So I'm going to take you there just so you can, I hope I'm going to take you there just so you can see the interface. Yes, Ava, are we seeing the, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So this was something that I heard last week, another strain of bird flu discovered in California. And here you can see, I'm not going to click on it because I'm worried I won't get back, is the full transcript. And also, if you're working with example videos in a teaching context, you can go to here and you can, you can find the time that you want. So I'm going to play the little clip where the scientist is explaining virus reassortment. So listen for the very funny metaphor that he uses. Okay. Sorry. Here we go.
D is mainly a cattle thing.
Okay.
All of the viruses we're talking about here with the bird flu are flu A, But then you get into these H and N designations. That talks about what specific form of two proteins called hemagglutinin and neuraminidase are on the surface of the virus. Then there can be even like finer distinctions called clades, subclades. But what we're talking about here is influenza A, H5N9, as opposed to influenza A, H5N1, which is what's been mainly affecting bird flocks. So we're looking at a difference in the neuraminidase protein.
Do we know where the strain came from?
So this could have been brought in from somewhere else or another animal host, but viruses have this weird ability called reassortment. If you have a host that gets infected with a couple of different viruses at the same time, sometimes the viruses can actually swap bits of code. I think of it like if you have enough kids at the birthday party, sooner or later somebody's going to be wearing somebody else's socks.
I've lived it, Charles.
Exactly.
Okay. So I think that is a great example. Talking about swapping bits of code and then saying, I think of it like if you have enough kids at the party, sooner or later, someone's going to be wearing somebody else's socks. It really stuck with me. Now I think every time I hear about like a virus mutating, I'm going to think about the two viruses swapping their socks. So let's just do one more example. I wanted to include this example because it's a humanities student. And in my context, we work with students, like 40 programs, and they're across all the like natural sciences, humanities, and social sciences. And sometimes with the 3-minute thesis in particular, the humanities students say, well, I can't do these things that like the natural sciences students do. Like I can't talk about diabetes, unlocking keys and other strategies you'll see, like personification, where they talk about like the cancer cells as the bad guys and the T cells as the detectives that are trying to find the bad guys. They say I can't do that, but they can. They have to be prepared and they have to think carefully about it, but they can. And in this example, this student's work is text analysis from the Hebrew Bible. And he compared it. It was really clever. And he won second place. He compared it.
Presenter is Timothy McNinch. And Timothy is from the Religion PhD program. And his presentation is entitled A Three-Dimensional Reading of the Biblical Ark Story. Is the timer ready?
Okay, so could I have a volunteer? So this is his image. And he then made this lovely comparison. Who will read it? Oh, Stacy.
The circles at first seem simple, yet this installation turns out to be a complex three-dimensional composition. And in my work, while the ancient stories in the Hebrew Bible seem unified and simple, their composition is actually just as complex as Verini's circles, written and tweaked by multiple authors over time.
Thank you. Yeah, so this was a really creative and impactful way to talk about text analysis. And so I think it's a great example of you can really do this in any field. Okay, so there's a few more examples here, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna put them there and give you just a second or two to read through them. But I think I've made the point. But again, these are good examples that you could share with students to start to generate for them ideas about how they could use this in their own contexts. So I'm trying to think if there's a new source in here that we haven't talked about. Like 3MT is a great place to look find science communication examples. The Royal Society we talked about, Wired. This is that same series. This was a scientist talking about, a scientist explaining sleep in 5 levels. And then this one, this was actually something I heard on the radio just last week. Once you have these strategies in your mind, you'll hear them everywhere. Like I just heard one about like in like happiness science, the hedonic treadmill. So the treadmill, you know, analogy. And then what was another one? A snooze button effect in psychology. So they're everywhere. Okay, so I do want to play. How are we on time? We're okay. I do want to play because we're almost to the Q&A. I do want to play a section of this one because it's also an example of a of kind of a live demonstration. So let me get to it. Okay.
Of time for melatonin to be released.
Sorry, I did the wrong thing. 11.
Goes down during the summer, and when it's dark all the time during the winter, and it turns out that light isn't the only thing that kind of gates your circadian rhythm. But I think the thing that's really important is, again, there are 2 processes, but the other one is the S process, and that one's just kind of a really important driver of sleep. And its formal name, we call it like the homeostatic sleep drive. Kind of the longer you're awake, the sleepier you get. You stay up, you get sleepy, time goes by, you get sleepier, time goes by, you get sleepier. But it's actually kind of a really fundamental principle for how sleep is regulated. And it's really kind of akin to like a balloon, okay? So, you know, you wake up in the morning and your balloon is flat, like you've kind of like drained out all the sleepiness. But then as you kind of go throughout the day, it kind of fills up, right? So you can use your energy, it gets filled up. And then it gets filled up more, like as you get towards nighttime, right? And then when it's at like this optimal amount is when you kind of like go to sleep and you kind of like let out all the sleepiness again. And this is really...
Okay, so I just think this is a fun video, and he's a really good teacher. You can just feel it. He really connects with each of the people. And these videos can also be used to talk to students about like the curse of knowledge that I see people shaking their head, right? They've been talking about their fields with other graduate students and with their professors, and they're throwing around terms, but to help them see like when you speak to undergrads and when you're presenting new information, that doesn't work, right? So it really can help them consider audience. For instance, if you play the graduate student explanation of this, very quickly, he starts to say, I wrote them down because it's like, he starts talking about reciprocally inhibitory processes and a rescinding system and dorsal and ventral arms. And, you know, and then you go back to his balloon demonstration and you really get a feel for the different audiences. Okay, so circling back, would somebody read this? Kenneth again. Thank you, Kenneth. Yes, with the great avatar.
I'm always willing to read, but
okay, super.
Speaking in front of others to explain complicated concepts is not easy and requires practice. Be very prepared. Get familiar with the materials to be presented and how to make it easier for students to understand. This is from an Emory Chemistry ITA.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it. I just love that this is one saying to the other, like you have to use these strategies. You need to think about how you're going to explain things to the students. And so we talked about these 4 strategies, and then we really broke them down into familiar first, everyday examples, and similes and metaphors. with a little bit of live demonstration and gestures and all of that. So for this next part, how could ITAs practice these skills? This is where I feel like you are the experts. So I'd like to talk about that during the discussion. You know, just finding those examples, watching them, figuring out the strategies. We've talked about maybe lexical, you know, expanding the lexical phrases that we provide to them and including some more categories, like this is how you can connect familiar topics to new terms. And, you know, there's many more phrases than these. And just raising their awareness to look out for these phrases. Like, and then other uses of this video, we talked about cursive knowledge. We also talked in my previous webinar for this group, we talked about shadowing and mirroring, like using especially 3MTs as examples of clear delivery of English. So I've linked to that webinar, which is on YouTube, in the references. I also have a book from University of Michigan Press that's called, it has a very long name because it's part of a series, What Every ESL Teacher Needs to Know, using the 3-minute thesis in the classroom. And it has a lot of these ideas in it as well. And it's an ebook, or it's available as an ebook, so it's very inexpensive. That was my plug. That's it. That's what I wanted to share. So we've got the remainder of the time. Oh, I had this.
Thank
wow.
you. Thank you so much, Heather. So we have arrived at the end of the presentation portion of the webinar, and now we are going to take questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself or put your question in the chat.
And maybe I'll stop the share just so we can all see each other more readily.
Go ahead, Ken.
First of all, thank you, Heather. That was a wonderful presentation. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking is that in my experience, I found that also sometimes what we need to teach is not just what they should be doing, but also things that they should try to avoid. And it goes back to whose comment was this? Sarah's comment about cultural expectations in the classroom and classroom culture, that sometimes they are coming from a different cultural classroom or classroom culture that pushes them to do certain things that when we look at it, we're like, that's not actually the most effective teaching. And it's things like worrying about, am I not going to sound smart enough if I use simple language? Things like that. But I think, yes, all the things you mentioned are definitely things that we want to teach our ITAs.
Yes, I totally agree that, like, this is very down in the strategy level, right? But I do think it probably needs to be prefaced with and accompanied by those bigger conversations. There was, because to find those those teaching assistant handbook quotes, I looked through quite a few TA handbooks. Some of them may even have been from your institutions, but I'm trying to see. There was one, if I can find it, that had a really good section on, I'm not going to be able to find it in the moment, but maybe I will. A really good section on like high context and low context communication styles, and really nice explanation about the that in our culture, the burden of the communication is really on the speaker, and they have to make sure that they're connecting. And so it really kind of, to me, illustrated like you do have to get down to their level and not talk about above their level. I didn't say that very well. Maybe somebody can help me.
Heather, I know that I have stuff on that, at least with my students. I don't think I'm the person you're referencing, but I do talk about that. But one of the other ways that we talk about it is that graduate student to graduate student is already high context because they know and like what they know and how it works with vocabulary, but then they have to build that context to help the undergrads learn. And then we talk about, and they do practice explaining concepts or defining terms to undergrads differently than they do to each other. We kind of explore what it feels like, but just like, so a lot of times I also just try to define teaching culture at our institution as lower context. So wherever they're from, whatever their background, teaching culture, at least in our case, tends to be low context. So I find that that also helps with buy-in when I'm working with my students.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I did just find it. I'm going to paste it in. I'm a little bit worried that I'm misattributing, but according to my notes, this was in the Vanderbilt TA guidebook, and it references some sources to talk about low context and high context. So I found that helpful. Yeah. And thank you, Sarah. Other questions, comments, complaints?
One other thing I was thinking as I was listening, and you were talking about like, oh, hit the snooze button or like a treadmill. When I work with the students on 3MTs, I find that my students that haven't lived here very long, they just like don't have those references. You know, it's a lot harder for them to find what that metaphor that is culturally not culturally contextualized for them, but works for the audience that they're presenting to. So, I mean, treadmills are probably pretty universal, but you know what I mean, right? Like I feel like it's harder for them to come up with them than the domestic students when I'm working on 3MTs.
Completely. Like the cultural reference, we have a whole oral communication course built around cultural references. And of course, in the 3MTs, you see a lot of cultural references. Yeah, so I completely agree that it's hard to know if the cultural reference that you come up with, even if you can come up with as an international student, is something that's familiar to the audience.
Did you say you have a whole course on cultural references, or?
Yeah, so it's an oral communication course, but it's for advanced level speakers, but the content is about US cultural references.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm happy to share this material. Students love it. They start off the course talking about a cultural reference from their own culture.
Uh-huh.
So I've learned like a lot of really fascinating, I'm trying to think of an example, like in Chile, if you say the red arrows, everybody knows what that means, you know, so.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they get the concept of what it is, and then they come up with US cultural references that they want to learn more about, and they present it. And it's tough though, because it's a lot of them are historical references, but
yeah,
newer references, as you all know, it's like it's generational. It's
yeah. Uh-huh.
One of our current 3MT competitors has the Futurama characters on her slide. And she assumed that we knew what that was. And she was saying Lily and Fred. And the preliminary judges were all people my age or older. and we're looking at it, we're like, is that Homer Simpson? Who is that?
Is that the Jetsons?
So, I mean, she was able to tweak it because she's just going to say, these characters from a very popular show these days called Futurama, but she thought it was something we would all be familiar with. Yeah. So, I don't know. I think maybe we've gotten a bit off topic. I see there's more questions in the chat.
Well, but just that's really translatable though to communicating science, like I think that's the whole idea is that those cultural norm, I mean, that class that you have and those skills that they gain, I mean, it's very translatable into transferable skills. Yeah.
I got that idea from somebody at the Consortium of Graduate Communication, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember who it was, but it was like a big aha moment for me. Like, oh yeah, that's a great content for students. Okay, everybody says yes to the cultural reference. Yeah, I'm happy. Just here, send me an email. I'm just going to put my email in here. I'm very happy to share.
I like the idea of having a term defined after you give an example, like in all the ones you showed, it was like something really relevant and practical. And then next sentence, and you say like, this means X. Because I think a lot of times students will just define it and then try to make a really good definition, either speaking or writing. But I like that like discourse approach to it. So that gave me a lot of ideas. My mind is just like thinking of how to apply them to speaking and writing and everything. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And yeah, great. I like my caveat was I don't work, like we do some training for ITAs, but it's not what we do full time. So I feel like I was hoping that that's what would happen. Like these would just plant some seeds and would give you ideas of like what would work in your context. Anybody else? We've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, Ken shared a really good idea, like practicing by pairing students with colleagues from a different field. So like STEM with humanities. I do something similar in one of my classes. So I have them, like I give them only a few minutes. So it's only 5 minutes that they can explain a concept from their field, and then the other person has to explain it back. And then they have to check whether it's been successful. It usually ends with a lot of laughter because it's never super accurate, but it gives them a very good idea of like, oh, well, this was not, I have some room for improvement.
Yeah, I think that is great. And we do that in our 3-minute thesis. I'm trying to think what we changed the name of it, but it's like a tips and strategy sessions for students before they do the preliminaries. And I used to just kind of give strategies like what I've given to you to them, which they found very helpful. But this year I said, you know what, let's do what Ava just said. I was like, I'm going to give you 3 minutes, just, unprepared, obviously, but and I put like a humanities student with an immunologist, and everybody in the evals of that session was like, wow, that was so helpful, because that person didn't know words that I was sure that they would know. And so I feel like it gave them a much more, like they walked away with a much clearer understanding of their audience and the adjustments that they were going to need to make to have it clear in the competition. I mean, it's hard for us too, right? I mean, if you try to, like every time we get a new colleague and we're, like, cause I work, with people outside of my field, and every time we get a new colleague on like the leadership team, we're all throwing around all these acronyms. Everybody's like, excuse me, what is blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? I think we're at time.
We are at time.
Okay.
So, with that, we have arrived at the end of today's webinar. Today's presentation was titled Teaching ITAs to Communicate Complex Science to General Audiences. Special thank you to our invited presenter, Heather. This was wonderful. So this concludes our program. You may now disconnect. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.